It was just after 3 a.m. when Eleanor Porter woke up to a sound that didn't belong in the stillness of her Queens apartment building. A faint, thin cry. At first, she thought she was dreaming. But the sound came again, sharper this time, cutting through the quiet like a knife. A child sobbing, high and desperate. Eleanor sat up, her heart thudding. She reached for her glasses, squinting at the red digits glowing on her nightstand clock. 3:15 a.m. The cries came again, muffled, but unmistakably from the apartment next door. That was Rachel Lawson's place. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen Rachel for nearly a week. Not since the young mother had strutted down the hall in heels, suitcase rolling behind her, a much younger man trailing close behind. Rachel had smiled vaguely, said she was going to Miami for a little fun. Eleanor had asked about her 3-year-old son, Ethan. Rachel had just laughed. He's fine, she'd said. He's a big boy. He can handle himself. At the time, Eleanor told herself it wasn't her business. Rachel had always been unpredictable. Men came and went. The police had shown up once after a loud fight. Sometimes, Rachel disappeared overnight and came back the next morning smelling like cheap perfume and whiskey. But she always came back. Now, nearly 6 days later, that little boy was crying again. Eleanor threw on her robe and stepped into the hallway, the linoleum cold beneath her feet. She knocked on Rachel's door. "Rachel? It's Eleanor. Honey, you in there?" No answer. The child's crying stopped for a second. Then it started again, weaker, like his voice was breaking. Eleanor pressed her ear against the door. Nothing but the thin whimpering from inside. She tried the handle. Locked. Her pulse quickened. "Oh God," she whispered. "She's really gone." Eleanor hesitated for a few seconds, then turned and shuffled back to her apartment. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. "NYPD emergency. What's your situation?" It's my neighbor," Eleanor stammered. "I think she left her baby alone. He's been crying for days. Please, someone come." 20 minutes later, the flashing lights of a patrol car cut through the quiet street. 2 officers, a heavy-set man and a younger woman, followed Eleanor down the hall. The man banged on the door. "Police! Open up!" Nothing. A faint whimper answered from the other side. The officers exchanged a look. "Step back, ma'am." One solid kick, and the door burst open. The smell hit them first. Rot, diapers, sour milk. It filled the air like something living. The apartment was a disaster. Bottles, ashtrays, clothes everywhere. A pizza box molded on the counter. From the bedroom came a small sound. A hiccup of breath. The young officer, Sarah Miller, followed the noise and froze in the doorway. There on a bare mattress sat Ethan Lawson, cheeks streaked with tears, his shirt filthy, his little legs trembling. "Hey there, sweetie," she said softly, kneeling down. "It's okay. We're here to help." The boy looked up, eyes glazed with exhaustion. "Mommy," he whispered hoarsely. Sarah swallowed hard. "We'll find her, sweetheart. I promise." She lifted him gently into her arms. He was light, too light. In the living room, the senior officer called it in. "We got an abandoned minor, about 3 years old. Apartment looks like it's been empty for days." When Detective Samuel Hayes arrived 30 minutes later, the scene barely surprised him, but still hurt. 20 years on the force, and this kind of thing never got easier. He surveyed the chaos with practiced eyes. The unpaid bills, the empty fridge, the broken mirror. Then, amid the mess, something odd caught his attention. A check stub for $775,000, and a note scrawled in lipstick. "Palm Breeze Hotel, Miami." Hayes turned it over in his hands, expression unreadable. "Wherever Rachel Lawson went," he muttered, "it wasn't just for fun." He glanced toward the door, where officers carried Ethan out wrapped in a blanket. The boy's small hand clutched a plastic toy car, the only piece of his world that hadn't been taken. For Detective Hayes, it was the beginning of a case that would stretch far beyond the walls of this apartment. A case of betrayal, greed, and one of the strangest twists of justice he'd ever seen. Detective Samuel Hayes stood in the doorway of apartment 4B, his expression unreadable as the smell of rot clung to the air. Officers had already cleared the scene, but the echoes of that child's crying still seemed to hang in the walls. The toys scattered on the floor, the half-empty bottle of whiskey, the untouched crib. All of it painted a picture that Hayes knew too well. Another child forgotten. Another parent chasing ghosts. He pulled on latex gloves and began a slow, deliberate survey of the apartment. Unpaid bills, eviction notices, collection letters. A social services warning taped to the refrigerator. And then, on the cluttered kitchen table, a check stub for $775,000. An amount far beyond what a bartender like Rachel Lawson could have ever earned. Next to it, a note scrawled on hotel stationery. Palm Breeze Hotel, Miami. Hayes frowned. He'd seen cases of neglect before, but this hinted at something deeper. He turned toward Officer Sarah Miller, the one who had found little Ethan crying on the mattress. You said the kid was alone for how long? 5 to 6 days, sir. Maybe more. Neighbors said she last saw the mom leaving with some young guy. Early 20s, leather jacket, suitcase in hand. Hayes jotted it down in his notebook. Give me her priors, any open CPS files, and a background check on that guy. Yes, sir. When the report came back an hour later, it told a story he'd heard before. Rachel Lawson, 35. One prior arrest for drug possession, another for disorderly conduct. Multiple warnings from Child Protective Services for neglect. No close relatives. No listed emergency contacts. Hayes rubbed his temples. A woman with no family, too proud to ask for help, too broken to know what love is. Just then his phone rang. It was dispatch. Detective Hayes, you might want to take this. Call from Miami PD. Hayes listened in silence as the officer on the other end spoke. His grip on the phone tightened. A car crash on the coastal highway outside Miami. A black sedan veered off a cliff around 2 a.m. 2 victims, both burned beyond recognition, tentatively identified as Rachel Lawson and Tyler Cruz, the boyfriend. No sign of braking. Preliminary assumption, drunk driving. Send me everything you've got, Hayes said, voice low but firm. When he hung up, Sarah was watching him from the doorway. Was it her? Hayes nodded. Yeah, she's dead. Both of them. Sarah exhaled, almost whispering. And the kid? He's alive, Hayes said, glancing toward the hallway where social services had carried Ethan out wrapped in a blanket hours earlier. But he's lost both parents in 1 week. He looked back into the trashed apartment. The mess, the chaos, the life that had spun completely out of control. Something about the timing gnawed at him. A check for hundreds of thousands of dollars. A sudden trip to Miami. A fatal crash days later. It didn't feel random. Hayes took one more slow lap around the room. On the nightstand, he found a small framed photo. Rachel holding newborn Ethan, a proud smile frozen in time. Next to her stood a man, tall, serious, protective. On the back, in faded pen, Rachel, Ethan, and David, discharge day. Hayes pocketed the photo. Find out who David Lawson is, he said. Sarah looked up from her notepad. You think he's the father? I think he's the only one who might still care, Hayes murmured. That night, as Hayes sat alone at his desk, he reviewed every detail. The child abandoned. The mother dead. The boyfriend unknown. The check, the hotel, the cliff. It all pointed to a truth he couldn't yet name, but one that experience whispered was there, buried just beneath the surface. For Detective Samuel Hayes, the real story was only beginning. The phone call came just after midnight. David Cole was half asleep in his Boston hotel room, the faint hum of a radiator filling the silence, when his phone buzzed across the nightstand. He almost ignored it, until he saw the caller ID, New York Police Department. His stomach tightened. Mr. Cole? A deep voice said on the other end. This is Detective Samuel Hayes from NYPD. I'm calling regarding Rachel Lawson and your son, Ethan. The name froze him. Rachel? What's happened? Is Ethan okay? There was a pause. Then Hayes's steady, measured voice. Your son is safe. But I'm afraid Rachel has been in an accident. She didn't survive. The line went silent for a full 10 seconds. Then, in a low rasp, David said, She left him, didn't she? Hayes hesitated. Yes, for nearly 6 days. A heavy thud sounded through the receiver. A fist hitting the wall, maybe, or a man collapsing under the weight of too many emotions. When David finally spoke again, his voice trembled with fury. She left our son alone to die, and now she's dead herself. Hayes didn't reply. There was nothing to say. I'll be there in 3 hours, David said, and hung up. By sunrise, David was standing in the visitation room of Child Protective Services, still wearing the same clothes from his flight. His hands were clenched, his jaw tight. The door opened, and a young social worker stepped in, followed by a small figure in a yellow hoodie clutching a toy truck. Ethan, she said softly, someone's here to see you. The boy looked up, uncertain, then his eyes widened. Daddy. In 2 steps, David was on his knees, pulling his son into his arms. The little body fit perfectly against his chest. Ethan's tiny hands gripped his shirt like he was afraid to let go. David buried his face in his son's hair. It's okay, buddy. I'm here now. I've got you. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was Ethan's muffled sobs against his father's shoulder. Detective Hayes stood a few feet away, giving them space. He'd seen thousands of reunions, some joyful, some heartbreaking, but this one left a mark. In that sterile government room, with its buzzing fluorescent lights and cheap carpet, a father and son had found each other again. After Ethan was taken to rest with a child counselor, Hayes and David sat in a nearby cafe. The steam from their coffee curled between them like fog. Tell me about her, Hayes said quietly. David leaned back, exhausted. Rachel was wild, impulsive. When we met, I thought I could save her, help her straighten out. But after Ethan was born, things changed. The drinking got worse. The drugs. I tried to take Ethan, but the court, they always side with the mother. He gave a bitter laugh. 3 years of fighting. Photos of her apartment, police reports, everything. Still, the judge said she was making progress. So I kept paying child support and praying she'd change. Hayes scribbled notes, then asked, You ever meet a man named Tyler Cruz? David shook his head. No, but it doesn't surprise me. She had a type. Young, smooth-talking, usually broke. He rubbed his temples. I just want to be a father, detective. I didn't want her dead. Hayes studied him for a moment. The weary lines around his eyes, the controlled anger that masked deep sorrow. He believed him. When they stood to leave, David turned to him. What happens now? As Ethan's father, you can petition for full custody, Hayes said. You'll need to meet with social services, but I'll make sure the process is smooth. David nodded, his gaze distant. After everything, I just want him to be safe. Outside, the gray February sky hung low over the city. Hayes watched as David walked down the steps toward the waiting taxi, his silhouette framed by the dull morning light, a man broken but moving forward. In Hayes's mind, one thought lingered. Rachel Lawson's story wasn't finished yet. There were too many loose threads. The mysterious check, the sudden trip to Miami, and a young man who'd vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. And somewhere in all that chaos lay the truth about what really happened the night Rachel died. 2 days later, Detective Samuel Hayes stepped off a plane into the thick, humid air of Miami International Airport. The city greeted him with palm trees, bright sun, and the uneasy dissonance that came with investigating death in a place built for pleasure. Rachel Lawson and her boyfriend Tyler Cruz had died on a stretch of scenic highway that tourists drove every day for the view. The official report called it an accidental crash caused by intoxication. But Hayes had read too many reports like that, and too often they hid something darker beneath. The Palm Breeze Hotel stood on the shoreline. 3 stories of white stucco, blue awnings, and a neon sign that flickered even at noon. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach and sea salt. The manager, a heavy-set man with too much cologne, smiled until Hayes showed his badge. Detective Hayes, NYPD, he said, sliding his credentials across the counter. You had a couple staying here, Rachel Lawson and Tyler Cruz. The man's smile faded. Oh, that was a tragedy. Poor people. Checked in January 27th. Checked out, well, the morning of the accident. Did you notice anything unusual about them? The manager hesitated. Well, they weren't exactly quiet. There were complaints, loud music, arguing, broken glass one night. The lady, Rachel, she was upset. Said something about being used. Used for what? I didn't ask, the manager muttered, glancing around nervously. You might want to talk to Maria, the maid. She cleaned their suite. Maria was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the weariness of someone who'd seen too much of people's private lives. She twisted her apron in her hands as she spoke. They drank a lot, she said softly. Bottles everywhere, every day. But that last morning, the woman was crying. She said the young man lied to her, that he didn't love her. He only wanted her money. Hayes's pen stopped mid-scribble. Money. Maria nodded. She said something about insurance. I don't know what she meant. Later that afternoon, Hayes met Javier, the hotel bartender. The man leaned on the counter, polishing a glass, his voice low and measured. That guy Cruz. I didn't like him, Javier said. Always flirting, showing off. Told everyone he was in real estate. He rolled his eyes. Real estate, my ass. Did they fight here? Hayes asked. All the time. But the night before they died, it was different. She was yelling that he'd tricked her. He just laughed. I was about to step in when I saw something weird. Javier leaned closer. He slipped something into her drink. Hayes's eyebrows lifted. You're sure? I've worked here 10 years, detective. I know when someone's trying to hide something. He poured a pinch of powder in her wine glass. Thought no one was watching. What happened next? She came back from the bathroom. They argued more, then left together. Drunk, angry but alive. Javier exhaled, shaking his head. Next morning, they were gone. Then the news hit. Car off a cliff. The next stop was Eduardo Gomez, a notary public whose name kept appearing in the hotel's guest registry. His office was a cramped space above a strip mall, the walls lined with dusty legal books. I remember them, Gomez said after some coaxing. The woman was nervous. She came in with the young man, said she wanted to take out a life insurance policy, $1 million. Hayes's pen stopped again. $1 million. Yes. Urgent, she said. Wanted everything processed that day. I advised her to think it over, but she insisted. The strangest part was the beneficiary. Not her son, not a family member. Gomez adjusted his glasses. She named the young man Tyler Cruz. Did she seem intoxicated? No, Gomez replied. She was sober. Sad, maybe, but clear-headed. She told me, and I quote, "He's the only person who really cares about me." Hayes let out a slow breath. It was a line he'd heard before, the kind spoken by people who mistake manipulation for love. When he left the notary's office, the sun was setting over Biscayne Bay, the horizon painted in streaks of orange and violet. The detective leaned against his rental car, staring out at the water. Everything was falling into place. Rachel Lawson, a desperate woman chasing affection. Tyler Cruz, a practiced con man with a history of fraud. $1 million policy signed days before their deaths. But there was still one question, the one that kept gnawing at him as the ocean breeze brushed his face. If Tyler was the con man and Rachel was the mark, why were they both dead? Hayes lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly against the dusk. Something about this accident didn't add up, and he wasn't leaving Miami until it did. By the time Detective Samuel Hayes returned to New York, the story had already started to rot from the inside. What Miami police had dismissed as a tragic drunk driving crash now smelled of fraud, betrayal, and a man who'd made a career out of both. The first thing Hayes did was pull Tyler Cruz's file. It was thick, far too thick for a 21-year-old. 2 prior arrests for fraud. One for selling fake concert tickets online. Another for forging loan papers. A half-dozen complaints that had never stuck. He had no steady job, no address, and a long list of women who described him the same way. Handsome, charming, broke. Hayes leaned back in his chair and exhaled. A career con, he muttered. He called the precinct's financial crimes division. Run a full trace on any women Cruz has scammed. Bank accounts, withdrawals, transfers, I want a pattern. A few hours later, the results came in. 2 of the women had filed formal reports. Cynthia Barker, a nurse who'd lost $20,000, and Janet Wells, a realtor out $35,000. Both had met Cruz through dating apps. Both had described whirlwind romances that ended the same way, a big investment opportunity, followed by a vanished boyfriend and an empty bank account. Cynthia's statement was particularly chilling. He told me he loved me. Said he was saving to start business. I wired him money, and then he disappeared. When I realized what happened, I wanted to die. Janet's story was nearly identical. Different city. Same lie. Same heartbreak. Hayes frowned as he highlighted the details. Flattery. Isolation. Trust. Then theft. Tyler Cruz didn't just steal money. He stole people's faith in themselves. But Rachel Lawson, she wasn't like his usual victims. She had no savings, no business to invest in, nothing of real value, except for that insurance policy. The file from Miami confirmed it. 3 days before her death, Rachel had purchased a $1 million life insurance plan, naming Tyler as the sole beneficiary. A perfect setup, except they were both dead. Hayes decided to dig deeper into Cruz's belongings. Miami PD had boxed up everything. Clothes, toiletries, a few cheap watches, a phone with a cracked screen, and one item that caught Hayes' attention immediately. A small leather-bound notebook, thin enough to slip into a jacket pocket. Inside were lists, columns of women's names, dates, and dollar amounts written in neat handwriting. Cynthia Barker, $20,000. Janet Wells, $35,000. Angela L., $8,000. Rachel Lawson, insurance, $1 million. Hayes felt a chill crawl up his spine. He flipped the page. Beneath the list were scribbled plans, diagrams, and arrows. Meet at Blue Lotus Bar. 2 weeks, proposed trip. Miami, accident. Collect payout. Further down, another note. Drug Zolom. Works fast. Drowsy in 10 minutes. Car cliff route. Fake head injury. Escape. It was a blueprint for murder. And a confession without words. Later that evening, he sat in his office, staring at the evidence board. Photos of Rachel and Tyler were pinned side by side. Two people caught in a doomed spiral of desperation and deceit. He imagined how it played out. Tyler convincing Rachel she was loved, that she deserved a vacation, that money could finally buy her happiness. He probably whispered that he'd take care of her, that she was special. Then he'd hand her a drink, slip a pill inside, and let gravity finish the job. But the universe had flipped his plan inside out. Hayes picked up the toxicology report again. Zolom, a powerful sedative, found in Tyler's blood at lethal levels. Rachel's test showed alcohol and traces of cocaine, but no sedative. The irony was almost too poetic. The hunter had drugged himself. Still, Hayes needed proof, something that would make the story airtight. He made a note to request hotel surveillance footage from that final night. If Tyler really had slipped something into Rachel's drink, maybe a camera had caught the moment that fate turned on him. He closed the notebook, rubbing his tired eyes. Greed, he murmured. It's always greed. Outside, the city hummed with distant sirens and flickering neon. Somewhere out there, a little boy named Ethan slept safely for the first time in weeks, unaware that the man who destroyed his mother's life had been destroyed by his own scheme. For Detective Hayes, that irony was justice. And justice, in this world, was rare enough to feel sacred. Detective Samuel Hayes had seen hundreds of investigations hinge on a single piece of evidence. A fingerprint, a phone record, a half-forgotten witness. But in this case, it was a few minutes of grainy hotel security footage that would change everything. Back in Miami, the Palm Breeze Hotel security office smelled of old coffee and bleach. Rows of dusty monitors flickered under the buzz of fluorescent lights. Detective Ramirez, the local investigator, stood beside Hayes, arms folded, skeptical but curious. You really think this was a murder plot? Ramirez asked. Hayes nodded. Not murder, a scam gone wrong. But I need proof. The security guard rewound the footage to the night before the crash, January 30th, 9:12 p.m. The timestamp blinked in the corner of the screen. The camera showed the hotel's open-air restaurant, tables crowded with laughing tourists, candlelight reflecting off half-empty glasses of wine. At a corner table near the balcony sat Rachel Lawson, wearing a black dress, her blonde hair falling in waves over her shoulders. Across from her, Tyler Cruz, his crisp white shirt unbuttoned just enough to look effortlessly charming. They looked, to any casual observer, like a couple on vacation. But Hayes watched closer. At first, Everything seemed normal. They talked, laughed, toasted. Then, at 9:48 p.m., Tyler leaned in, gesturing toward the entrance as if he'd spotted someone. Rachel turned to look. That's what happened. Hayes, pause it. Right there. Tyler's hand slipped toward Rachel's glass. His fingers pinched something small, a flicker of motion barely visible, a sprinkle into the wine. Then he stirred it gently with his finger, smiling as she turned back. Ramirez whistled under his breath. Well, I'll be damned. Hayes leaned closer. He drugged her. But a few minutes later, a waiter approached the table, refilling both glasses from a new bottle of wine. Amid the chatter and clinking glasses, something subtle happened. The glasses switched positions. Rachel lifted the one that had originally been in front of Tyler. Stop. Rewind that, Hayes said. There, that's the switch. Ramirez blinked. You think he drank his own poison? I don't think, Hayes said quietly. I know. The next 10 minutes of footage confirmed it. Tyler grew sluggish, his movements slowing. His posture slumped. Rachel, meanwhile, appeared tipsy but alert, laughing louder, waving her hands as she talked. By 10:30 p.m., they stood to leave. Rachel stumbled slightly, grabbing his arm to steady herself. Tyler's head hung low as they exited the frame, Rachel half carrying him. That's the last time anyone saw them alive, Ramirez murmured. Hayes sat back in his chair, a grim satisfaction forming behind his tired eyes. He planned to drug her, kill her, and collect the insurance money. But fate had other plans. Later that night, back at the Miami precinct, Hayes spread the evidence across a metal table. Toxicology reports, the insurance forms, photos of the crash site, and now, screenshots from the footage. On one image, Tyler's hand hovered over Rachel's glass. On another, their drinks had switched. Everything fit. The sedative, Zolom, was found in Tyler's system at levels high enough to cause unconsciousness. None was found in Rachel's. He'd meant for her to black out behind the wheel, but he'd been the one to fall asleep instead. The car's black box confirmed the rest. No braking, no steering correction, no attempt to avoid the curve. Just a straight plunge into darkness. Ramirez joined him, studying the photos. So what do you call this, detective? Hayes gave a thin smile. Poetic justice. Ramirez chuckled. Hell, a way to go. Hayes didn't answer. He was looking at a printout of Rachel's photo. Her smiling, holding her son Ethan in her arms, the edges of the picture burned slightly from years on a refrigerator door. For a woman like her, broken, reckless, desperate for affection, love had been the most dangerous drug of all. And in the end, it wasn't a detective or a judge that punished her killer. It was his own greed. Hayes turned off the monitor, pocketed the USB drive, and said quietly, let's bring this story home. Detective Samuel Hayes had been in law enforcement long enough to know that not every case finds closure. Some simply fade into silence, sealed away under paperwork and time. But this one, this twisted web of greed, neglect, and karmic retribution, deserved to end in the light. A week after uncovering the hotel footage, Hayes sat across a long table in the Miami Police Department's conference room. The blinds were half closed, slicing sunlight into sharp white lines. On the wall, behind him, hung photos. The crash site, the victims, the toxicology reports, and the still frames from the hotel's security cameras. Across from him sat Lieutenant Ramos, Detective Ramirez, and Evan Morris, a representative from the Brightline Insurance Company, his suit far too expensive for the setting. Detective Hayes, the lieutenant said, adjusting his glasses, you said you've got a full reconstruction? Hayes nodded. He placed his notebook on the table, flipping it open to the page that bore two names written in clean block letters, Rachel Lawson and Tyler Cruz. Here's what really happened. Hayes began, his voice calm, deliberate, the cadence of a man laying down truth piece by piece. Tyler Cruz, he continued, was a seasoned con artist. His targets were always the same, women in emotional or financial distress. He'd charm them, gain their trust, and drain their bank accounts. But with Rachel Lawson, he saw a bigger opportunity. Hayes slid a photo across the table. Rachel at the Palm Breeze Hotel, smiling beside Tyler. He convinced her to take out a $1 million life insurance policy, naming him as the sole beneficiary. She thought it was proof of love. He saw it as a payday. Lieutenant Ramos crossed his arms. And the plan? Simple, Hayes said. Drug her, make it look like a drunk driving accident, and cash the check. He pulled another photo, a still from the hotel surveillance video. This is him slipping Zolom, a powerful sedative, into her drink. Ramirez leaned forward. The same drug found in his blood? Exactly, Hayes replied. But he made one mistake. During a toast, their glasses got switched. She drank the clean wine. He drank the poisoned mint for her. The room fell silent for a moment. Even the insurance rep stopped tapping his pen. Hayes continued. He passed out while driving, lost control on the coastal highway, and went straight off the cliff. The car's black box shows no braking, no swerving, just a straight line into nothing. Ramos exhaled slowly. So the killer killed himself by accident. Poetic justice, Ramirez murmured. The insurance representative cleared his throat. So the payout. Hayes turned his gaze toward him, the faintest hint of disdain in his eyes. The policy was obtained under false pretenses. Fraud. Conspiracy to commit murder. Legally, there's no valid claim. And the only beneficiary, Mr. Cruz, is deceased. Meaning, the rep said with a forced smile, we don't owe a dime. That's one way to put it, Hayes replied. The lieutenant leaned back in his chair. Hell of a case, detective. You turned a routine accident report into a full-blown criminal investigation. Hayes gathered his files, sliding them neatly into his leather briefcase. Sometimes the truth doesn't scream. It whispers. You just have to listen close enough to hear it. That evening, Hayes walked along Miami Beach, the sky painted in gold and violet, the tide whispering against the sand. The case was officially closed, but something about it stayed with him. The photograph of a smiling mother who'd wanted love so badly she couldn't see the danger in it. He thought of Ethan, Rachel's son, and how the boy would someday learn that his mother's last choice had almost cost him everything. But fate had intervened in the cruelest and strangest way possible. As the wind rolled off the ocean, Hayes thought about the thin line between justice and coincidence. Sometimes, life itself delivered the verdict that courts never could. He murmured to himself, the world has a way of balancing the scales, doesn't it? Then he turned and walked away, the sound of the waves following him like applause for a play that had finally reached its tragic end. 6 months later, the chill of winter had melted into a warm August afternoon in upstate New York. Detective Samuel Hayes drove down a quiet suburban street lined with maple trees, their leaves just beginning to hint at autumn. The GPS led him to a modest white house with blue shutters and a freshly painted fence. In the driveway sat a blue sedan, waxed to a shine. On the front lawn, a small boy in denim overalls pushed a red toy fire truck across the grass, his laughter carrying in the breeze. Hayes parked and stepped out. The sound of the car door closing made the boy look up. For a split second, the detective saw recognition, not from memory, but from something deeper. Innocence meeting the man who had once carried him out of darkness. The front door opened. David Cole appeared, smiling as he waved. Detective Hayes, he said warmly. Good to see you again. Come on in. The house smelled faintly of coffee and fresh laundry. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, stick figures, sons, and one labeled Daddy and Me. He's been doing better, David said as they sat at the kitchen table. The nightmares have stopped. Therapy helped, but mostly just time. And stability. Hayes nodded. He looks healthy. Strong. David smiled, glancing out the window at his son. He loves that truck. Won't go anywhere without it. Says it makes him feel safe. The detective sipped his coffee, the silence between them comfortable. You've built something good here, Hayes said. David's expression softened. After everything that happened, I didn't think it was possible. I thought I'd lost my son forever. But turns out, life gives you a second chance, if you're lucky enough to take it. He paused, his tone more reflective. You know, detective, I've spent months trying to understand Rachel. Part of me still hates her for what she did. Leaving him alone like that, it's unforgivable. But another part of me thinks she wasn't evil, just lost. Hayes nodded slowly. People like her don't see themselves as villains. They just make one bad choice after another until there's no way back. Yeah, David said quietly. And she found someone who took advantage of that. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of a lawn mower echoing faintly in the distance. Did you ever tell Ethan about her? Hayes asked. David sighed. Not yet. He's too young. One day, I'll tell him the truth, but not the ugly version. I'll tell him his mom made mistakes and that she loved him, even if she didn't know how to show it. Hayes looked out the window again. Ethan was crouched by the flowers now, fascinated by a butterfly resting on his hand. It was such a simple scene, but after what that child had endured, it felt miraculous. When Hayes stood to leave, David followed him to the door. I never thanked you properly, David said. If you hadn't kept digging, they'd have written it off as an accident. No one would have known what really happened. You gave me closure, and you gave my son his life back. Hayes offered a faint smile. Just doing my job, Mr. Cole. But I'll admit, this one mattered. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, washing the yard in soft gold. Ethan spotted them and came running up the walkway, clutching his toy fire truck. Bye, mister, he called out, beaming. Hayes crouched down. Take care of your dad, okay? The boy nodded solemnly. I will. As Hayes walked back to his car, he looked once more at the father and son standing in the doorway. Two survivors of someone else's chaos, finding peace in the ordinary. Driving away, he thought about all the cases that ended in loss, and how rare it was to see one end like this, with light, not tragedy. Sometimes, justice wasn't about punishment. Sometimes, it was about survival. And this time, that was enough.